The anime begins by showing a region called Kaga, led by a man named Kagamitsu Daigo. On that day, his wife, Nue no Kata, was about to give birth, and Daigo hoped that she would give birth to a son so that someone could inherit his leadership. Even so, he looked worried while waiting for her delivery. The scene changed and showed what Daigo did sometime before his wife gave birth. At that time, he visited a temple called Hell of Hall, and at that temple, he made a pact with the demons. In the agreement, Daigo must give something he has in exchange for peace and prosperity for his village and its leadership. He says he wants prosperity for his village because it turns out that the residents of Kaga village are in poverty and are being hit by an epidemic that often kills residents. Actually, Daigo didn't know what sacrifice the demons wanted for the exchange, so that made him worried about his wife's birth process. Even though he was about to make a pact with the demon, he was warned by a monk not to make the pact. But he didn't care about it, and preferred to kill the monk because he felt the monk was only getting in his way. After stating his request to the demons, lightning immediately struck Daigo and made a curse mark on his forehead, symbolizing that he had made a pact with the demon. The symbol is an X, the same as the mark on the monk he killed. In the end, Daigo's worries came true. Shortly after his son was born, lightning suddenly struck his son and shocked everyone who was there. When he saw the state of his baby son, Daigo was surprised because his son was just a skull without eyes, nose, ears, hands, and feet. Even so, his son is still alive, and Daigo laughs and feels very happy because his condition is a sign that his agreement with the demon has been approved. Unexpectedly, Daigo ordered the midwife to throw away his son and said that his son was no longer useful. Noe, unwilling if her son was thrown away, tried to block his intention, but he still did not care and told Noe that she would give birth to another child who would later become his successor. When the midwife is about to throw away the baby, she feels unbearable because she sees his face showing enthusiasm for life, so in the end, she deliberately washes away him with a boat and hopes that later someone else will find him. But just after the baby was swept away, the midwife was suddenly eaten by a monster that had been stalking her from the start. Not long after, an old blind man appeared who could see the monster's soul and immediately killed the monster. After that incident, Kaga village gradually began to live in prosperity because Daigo had sacrificed his son, who was forced to lose 48 of his organs because they were taken by demons. And even worse, no one knows the fate of his son except for an old blind man named Biwamaru. 16 years after the incident, a wandering man named Jukai is seen who likes to attach fake bodies to corpses whose body parts have been lost due to war. Not long after, someone praised his actions, but Jukai argued that he was doing it just for fun and to make himself change for the better. Meanwhile, in another place, a little girl named Dororo is seen selling. Not long after that, several thugs appeared who wanted to beat her because it turned out that she had already sold their belongings. Realizing that they noticed her actions, Dororo immediately ran away. On the other hand, a young man was seen helping a boy, but the boy told his mother that the face of the man who had helped him looked like a doll. Meanwhile, Dororo, still being chased by the thugs earlier, accidentally meets a hungry dog. When she wanted to feed the dog, the thugs threatened her by saying they would kill it. Dororo, who didn't want the dog to die because of her, finally gave up and volunteered to be beaten by the thugs. Even so, Dororo still dared to fight the thugs by throwing stones at them, thus making the thugs hurt and angry, and then he intended to kill her by drowning her in the river. At the same time, the doll-faced youth appeared on the bridge. Strangely, the young man couldn't see Dororo and the others and instead saw an evil monster's aura near the river. When they looked towards the river, they saw a pile of mud which turned out to be the monster the young man had been monitoring. This made the young man immediately release his two fake hands, which contained two swords, and he immediately beat the monster. The battle between them was quite fierce, but the young man defeated the mud monster in the end. When the fight was over, Dororo was amazed by the young man because he, who was blind, could defeat the monster easily and only had his blade hand. Not long after, the mask the young man was wearing suddenly fell off, and his face, which was originally without skin, miraculously grew skin, which surprised Dororo. At the same time, one of the demon statues in the Hall of Hell Temple was destroyed by a lightning strike, and it turned out that the young man was Hyakimaru, Daigo's son, who was made a sacrifice by his father several years ago. One of the demonic statues that have been destroyed indicates that the body parts belonging to Hyakimaru that were sacrificed by Daigo to the demons will be magically returned to Hyakimaru. But on the other hand, it made the prosperity promised by the demons to Daigo disappear little by little. The scene changes and shows Noe, who now has a son to replace Daigo's leadership. Meanwhile, Dororo was curious about who the young man, who was none other than Daigo's son, really was, so she continued to follow Hyakkimaru while doing various ways to be able to communicate with him. Unfortunately, because some of his senses have been sacrificed for the demon, Hyakkimaru cannot hear or see Dororo. Even so, her presence around him really helps him. When Hyakkimaru was about to eat raw fish, Dororo swiftly tried to make a fire and cook the fish. But she was surprised again because Hyakkimaru ate freshly cooked fish without feeling the slightest heat. Even though he cannot see or hear Dororo, he can actually feel her presence near him, and the way he sees her is the same as Biwamaru, who can see the soul aura of any living creature. Besides being able to see other living things by seeing the aura of the creature's soul, Hyakkimaru can also distinguish the color of a creature's soul. If someone sees a red soul, he will think of the creature as an enemy because the red soul is produced from hatred. But if he sees a white soul, he will think of it as a good creature because a white soul is an innocent soul, the same as Dororo. This explains why Hyakkimaru lets Dororo be near him because she is not a threat. The next day, she tries to tell him that they both need money to survive. Dororo, who had an idea, then suggested to Hyakkimaru to use his power to kill a monster in a village they were going to. When she arrived at the village, Dororo confidently offered her monster exorcist services to the village head while telling Hyakkimaru's prowess in eradicating monsters. At first, the village head had doubts about them, but because there was no other choice, they were finally accepted and given food and a place to rest. At night, when they were resting, suddenly the lights went out, and a monster with a big head appeared that came to them. Dororo, who was afraid, ordered Hyakkimaru to rush to kill it, but he didn't even want to attack the monster and let the monster go. Not long after, the village head came, so Dororo was forced to lie to the village head and admit that they had taken care of the monster. The next day, Dororo and Hyakkimaru were invited by the female village head to Bandai-sama, the highest leader in the village. When they got there, Hyakkimaru prepared to kill her, but his attempt was immediately prevented by Dororo. Because Hyakkimaru tried to kill Bandai-sama, they both got locked up by the villagers, so Dororo became annoyed with him. She never thought he would kill Bandai-sama because she feels that Bandai-sama is a friendly and kind person. Not long after, Biwamaru appeared and said that he had seen Hyakkimaru. Hearing this, Dororo was confused and asked Biwamaru why he could know about Hyakkimaru, even though he was blind. Then he explained that they could see everything around them, even if it was only the color. For example, seeing Dororo, Biwamaru, and Hyakkimaru can only see white. Even so, he explained that their senses were very sharp beyond those of ordinary humans. Not long after, an evil aura suddenly appeared, and Hyakkimaru, who felt the aura, immediately rushed to kill him. Then Biwamaru rushed to follow Hyakkimaru. Unexpectedly, the aura came from Bandai-sama, and he explained to Dororo that Bandai-sama had a dark red aura which is a demonic aura. Shortly after, he explained that Bandai-sama suddenly changed to her true form, a monster, and started fighting Hyakkimaru. But strangely, when the monster was cornered, the head of the village instead protected the monster and let the monster escape, so Hyakkimaru immediately chased him. On the other hand, Dororo was angry with what the village head had done, and it turned out that he had done it to save his citizens from being eaten by the monster. He also explained that he would provide other food from nomads who passed through his village. Meanwhile, the battle between Bandai-sama's monster and Hyakkimaru continued in the forest until she was finally defeated by Hyakkimaru. At the same time, Dororo, Biwamaru, and the village head caught up with Hyakkimaru in the forest. Not long after that, a monster appeared that had come to them last night, and notified them by ringing its bell. When Dororo was about to approach the monster, she instead found some of the belongings of the wanderers who had been killed by Bandai-sama, and the treasure was quite large, enough to support the residents of the village. After that incident, Dororo apologized to Hyakkimaru for snapping at him earlier. Unfortunately, he could not hear her apology, but he began to accept her presence. Then Hyakkimaru touched her face and wrote his name on the ground. This made Biwamaru remember that Hyakkimaru was the baby boy who was previously thrown away by boat. At the same time, one of the statues in the Hall of Hell Temple was again struck by lightning and shattered. Suddenly, Hyakkimaru winced in pain and made Biwamaru and Dororo feel confused, but that happened because he finally got his sense of taste back. The scene changes and shows a group of people who are carrying out a massacre in a village. Not long after, a woman appeared, calling out the name of one of the men there. But unfortunately, The woman was actually stabbed by a member of the killer group and died instantly. Unexpectedly, it turned out that one of the killers was Jukai, a person who had previously placed prosthetic limbs on several war-torn corpses, and the woman who died was his wife. His wife's death made Jukai sad and frustrated, so he jumped off a cliff. But all of that turned out to be just his past. He was still a member of the Shibandono group, or the Assassins group at that time. Several years after the tragic incident, Jukai, who was once a cold-blooded killer, has now become a helper for people who have lost their limbs. He continues to make prosthetic body parts that he learned from the transport ship that had helped him in the past, so he has become very popular with people because his skills have been able to help many people to continue their lives normally. Jukai has one student named Kaname, who often helps him. Kaname always helps him because Jukai has helped him before. When Kaname was walking in the forest, he suddenly saw a boy whose arm was cut off by a samurai attack. Then he rushed to bring the boy to Jukai for treatment. But after the treatment, the boy's mother revealed several facts about Jukai, making Kaname very angry with him. Kaname said that one of the people who had been slaughtered by Jukai before was his father. Because of that, he intended to kill him. But Jukai said he had promised the boy that he would heal him, so Jukai asked Kaname for leniency not to kill him so he could fulfill his promise. After hearing those words, Kaname forgave Jukai and let him heal the boy first. But after the boy recovered, Kaname, who was initially vengeful, now couldn't vent his grudges and chose to calm his mind by leaving Jukai and the prosthetic limbs made by him. Since Kaname's departure, Jukai has become very sad. Even his enthusiasm to help people has faded. When Jukai was contemplating by the river, he accidentally saw a boat, and when he approached the boat, he was surprised to find a living baby boy without eyes, a nose, and other organs. Jukai, who felt sorry for him, finally brought the baby boy to his house to be treated. 6 years later, the baby boy has grown up, so Jukai teaches him several survival ways. He realized even though the boy couldn't see or hear, he had a mysterious power that not everyone had. Besides that, because the boy doesn't have a name, Jukai gives him Hikamaru. As time went on, Hikamaru was taught the art of swords and grew into a very strong and skilled samurai figure. Even he can defeat monsters bigger than himself, even though he is blind. Sadly, he still received a pretty bad injury. Fortunately, he could not feel the pain from the wound he had suffered. One time, Jukai found an oddity in Hikamaru's body when he defeated a monster. He saw Hikamaru's loose prosthetic leg, and when he was about to put it on, he was surprised to see Hikamaru's newly growing leg. This made him realize that Hikamaru's body was being mortgaged to the demon. In the end, Jukai sent Hikamaru away to get the other body parts. Before he left, Jukai gave him a necklace that he had previously found when Hikamaru was on the boat with the hope that he would be able to meet his parents. Turning to the present, a male samurai is seen killing his enemies without hesitation. But he was forced to slaughter people by his leader. The scene changes and shows Hikamaru and his comrade, who is relaxing in front of a bonfire. At that time, he accidentally stepped on fire and felt pain for the first time because his sense of taste had returned. After Hikamaru and Dororo continued their journey, heavy rain suddenly fell, and they took shelter in a temple. Not long after, a woman appeared who told Hikamaru to take shelter, but Dororo told the woman that he was deaf. Then they talked, and she finally found out that the woman's purpose was in the temple to beg the gods to return her elder brother, who had disappeared 5 years ago. Not long after, an old man who asked for help with an injured condition suddenly appeared. Then Dororo approached the old man while Hikamaru, who saw blood-red aura coming out of his eyes, rushed after him. Dororo, chasing Hikamaru, was shocked when she saw several people killed horribly. But then, a man suddenly appeared and attacked Hikamaru. Luckily, he managed to fend off that attack. The man then says that he did this because of his bloodthirsty katana, and the fight between them begins. Their fight was quite fierce, but finally, Hikamaru could drop the man into the abyss, releasing the katana from the man's grasp. When Dororo wanted to take the katana from Hikamaru's prosthetic leg, it suddenly glowed, and she was controlled by it instead. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the woman is seen looking for Dororo and Hikamaru. However, she instead met the man Hikamaru dropped, and it turned out that the man was her elder brother. This then made the woman take her elder brother to her house. Meanwhile, Dororo, still controlled by the cursed katana, tried to escape. Unfortunately, her efforts were in vain, as the katana was much stronger. It turned out that she was so strong that she almost killed the villagers who were trying to approach her. In the end, Dororo was completely controlled by the katana. Then she was directed to the katana's master's house, waiting for its arrival. On the other hand, Hyakkimaru secretly followed Dororo. When she entered the village and almost headed for the katana owner's house, Hyakkimaru confronted her. Meanwhile, the master of that katana, who was still at his younger sister's house, wanted to go out but was prevented by his younger sister. His younger sister asked him to forget about the katana and return to her, but the katana was like flesh and blood to him, so he ignored her persuasions. The scene again shows the incident that happened to the man about how the cursed katana appeared and became his property. The katana appeared due to an order from his leader, who forced him to kill enemies with that sword. His leader said that if the katana is exposed to a lot of blood from the dead, then the katana will become stronger. His leader's words were proven when he used the katana to hurt several prisoners there. It became sharper, and the rust that had previously stuck to it even disappeared. But because the katana was too strong to control, it finally made the man not hesitate to kill everyone there, including his leader, who had given him the katana. Even so, the woman who still loved her elder brother kept trying to persuade him to forget about his katana, but he refused. On the other hand, Dororo, still being controlled by the katana, actually got into a fight with Hyakkimaru, and he even almost hurt her. Luckily, the katana fell down thanks to Hyakkimaru's precise attack. But the problem was still not over because suddenly the man appeared there and took back his katana. The man started his action, so it happened again. Even though he was initially pressured, Hyakkimaru finally won the fight and killed the man. Even he managed to make the cursed katana lose its power and return to being a normal katana. Not long after, the woman came and saw her elder brother had died, and she could only mourn him. At the same time, Hyakkimaru's ears suddenly grow after successfully breaking the katana so that now he can hear. Meanwhile, Daigo looks very upset because several demonic statues in the Hall of Hell Temple have been destroyed again. He felt sure that this was caused by the son he sacrificed for, so he started looking for the whereabouts of the son he had thrown away a few years ago, who was none other than Hyakkimaru. The scene changed, showing Hyakkimaru, who could already hear but was disturbed by the sounds around him. This happened because it was the first time he could hear, so Dororo lifted his ears with a cloth to reduce the sounds that bothered him. Not long after, a bird monster appeared and attacked them, but Hyakkimaru had a lot of trouble fighting the bird monster because the sound of the bird monster bothered him so much. Luckily, when Hyakkimaru was pressed, Biwamaru came and helped him to kill the bird monster. As a result of the fight, Hyakkimaru suffered serious injuries, so he had to be treated. However, Dororo became disappointed in him because she felt he became very weak after being able to hear. But Biwamaru emphasized that this was natural because Hyakkimaru was still using his ears for the first time. Not long after, Hyakkimaru regained consciousness, and he looked as if he was tormented by his hearing. This made Biwamaru try to help him by explaining the sounds around him, but that method didn't work because Hyakkimaru was still not used to it. The next day, when Hyakkimaru, Dororo, and Biwamaru were still asleep, Hyakkimaru suddenly woke up when he heard someone singing, so he went over to that person. When he got there, it turned out that the singing had come from a girl named Mione who was in the river. Hyakkimaru, curious, tried to approach her, but because his condition was still not recovering, he finally fainted in her arms. Seeing this, Mione brought Hyakkimaru to her house to be treated. She even let Dororo and Biwamaru live in her house. At that time, they meet the orphans who live with Mione. It turned out that she took care of the children because they no longer had parents or relatives to look after them. One of the boys then told Mione to sleep while the other boys gave food to Dororo and Biwamaru. Then Dororo asked one of the boys why Mione had to sleep during the day. The boy replied that Mione had to work as a maid for the Sakai clan every night, so she had to sleep during the day to rest. Not long after, Biwamaru said goodbye to go around the area. The scene then moves on to Daigo, who wants to attack the village where the Sakai clan is. But one of his bodyguards said that their troops' food supplies were not enough because their village was being hit by a drought, so Daigo discouraged him. Meanwhile, Noe had noticed that the prosperity promised by the demon had begun to fade, though they still didn't know the cause. Meanwhile, while checking Hyakkimaru's condition, Mione noticed his fever was not dropping. Therefore, she took the initiative to ask for medicine at the Sakai clan inn. On the other hand, Biwamaru, traveling around the area, suddenly found a strange hole in which there was a burning eye. When Mione got the medicine and was about to approach Hyakkimaru, she looked embarrassed by his gaze. But she is confused about why Hyakkimaru can look at her, even though she knows he is blind. Dororo explained that Hyakkimaru could see only in the form of a soul aura, but that explanation was still not understood by Mione. Suddenly, Hyakkimaru touched Mione's mouth and seemed to want to say something. Dororo tried to explain Hyakkimaru's intention, and it turned out that he wanted to hear Mione sing because, according to him, her voice was very soothing. Hearing that, Mione started singing with all her heart and made Hyakkimaru feel calm and get used to his sense of hearing. Shortly after, Biwamaru came and told them it would be a good place to take shelter in case of another war, but he said that the place was inhabited by demonic creatures that nested there. After getting this information, Hyakkimaru rushed there, even though his body was still not healed. On the other hand, Mione wanted to help them and decided to try working in the enemy's territory to get information about when a war would happen. Dororo, who felt sorry for seeing Mione working on both sides, intended to help, but she separated from Mione and tried to find her on the way. At the same time, Hyakkimaru and Biwamaru are now above the hole in question. Not long after, a monster appeared, which sucked them both into the hole. Even though the size of the monster was very large, thanks to their cooperation, Hyakkimaru managed to stab the monster. Unfortunately, Hyakkimaru's leg was stumped due to being bitten by the monster. After the monster was defeated, he suddenly returned. Then his voice returned, so Hyakkimaru screamed because he was enduring the pain from his severed leg. On the other hand, Dororo, who had already found Mione, was shocked when she saw Mione being harassed by enemy troops. After the fight, Biwamaru took the injured Hyakkimaru home to be treated. But they met Dororo on the way, and she was very surprised after seeing Hyakkimaru's stumped leg and his voice. When Hyakkimaru was at home, Mione, who had just returned, was surprised to see him injured, so she rushed to take care of him. But when Mione was taking care of him, Dororo chose to leave because she was disappointed with Mione, who turned out to be working as a prostitute. While outside, Dororo was approached by one of the boys who said they wished to have a rice field one day. The children hoped that the rice fields would later be filled with golden rice. Therefore, Mione worked very hard to be able to buy a field. After hearing that, her disappointment towards Mione became a little less. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Daigo is seen being engaged in an argument with his youngest son, Tahamaru, who insists on fighting alongside his father, even though he has forbid because Tahamaru is still too early to join the war. Hearing this, Tahamaru tried to persuade his mother, but she also forbade him. Feeling disappointed with his parents, he finally left with his men, Higo and Mu. Tahamaru felt that his mother didn't love him, and he felt that she was hiding something. Since he was a kid, he never got attention from his mother because she only paid attention to a statue whose head was struck by lightning. The scene then switches to Hyakkimaru, who tries to stand up, but he keeps falling. Luckily, Mione came to help him and returned to singing to make him feel better. Meanwhile, Biwamaru decided to wander again. But before leaving, he told Dororo not to let Hyakkimaru go into the hole. When Mione wanted to go to work, Dororo encouraged her because now Dororo felt she was a great woman. Dororo hopes that Mione can fulfill her desire to own a rice field and harvest a lot of rice so that she no longer has to work as a prostitute. The next day, when Hyakkimaru's leg recovered, he returned to practice his technique. Mione, who wanted to go to work, asked Dororo to look after him so he wouldn't go fight the monsters in the previous hole. When Mione left, it turned out that there were several soldiers who were stalking her without her knowledge. At night, Dororo, who woke up, looked panicked because she didn't see Hyakkimaru. Then she went looking for him, and it turned out that Hyakkimaru had secretly returned to the previous hole to defeat the monster, which was not dead yet. The fight was fierce. Even though Hyakkimaru was now alone, he finally defeated the monster and got his legs back. When they were walking home, they were both startled by smoke coming out of Mione's house, so they both rushed there. When they arrived, Dororo was shocked to see that Mione's place had been burnt and their friends had been killed by enemy clan troops who suspected that Mione was a spy, so they wanted to finish her off. However, Dororo did not remain silent and tried to save Mione. But a soldier also holds her and intends to kill her, thinking she is a spy. When the soldier was about to attack Dororo, his hand suddenly severed because he was stopped by Hyakkimaru. Hyakkimaru realized that Mione was dying, and at the same time, he was reminded of his memories after hearing her singing in his last moments. Mione's death made Hyakkimaru go berserk and slaughter the soldiers from the enemy clan. Luckily, Dororo calmed him, but one of the enemy soldiers who had killed Mione managed to escape. Dororo then showed a package containing rice seeds to Hyakkimaru and said that Mione took the rice seeds from the enemy so she could grow crops in the fields according to her and the orphan's dreams. After knowing this, he hugged Mione's body while saying her name with frustration and deep sadness. After burying Mione and the orphans, they continued their journey. A few days later, Dororo, feeling bored while on the trip, tries to comfort Hyakkimaru to make him laugh, but he just stays quiet because he can't feel it. This annoyed Dororo, and she walked away first, but suddenly she was startled by an object resembling a food box that fell from above her head. When she looks up, it turns out that a spider monster is preying on someone, so Hyakkimaru rushes to attack it. Unfortunately, the spider monster was quite agile, so Hyakkimaru was trapped by its web attack, and it managed to escape. But when the spider monster wanted to prey on humans again, its body became uncontrollable because its condition weakened, and it turned into a woman instead. Meanwhile, Hyakkimaru and Dororo, who has just arrived in a village, find out that the village is being hit by a problem because many villagers have been kidnapped. Knowing this, Dororo takes the initiative to catch the kidnapper and hopes to be rewarded. The next day, a man named Yuzero is seen who finds a woman lying on the ground, which is none other than the previous spider monster, whose condition is now getting weaker. Knowing that the woman was sick, Yuzero took her to his house, fed her, and called her Ohagi. Unfortunately, he still doesn't know who she really is. After that, he said goodbye to finish his work. Meanwhile, Dororo and Hyakkimaru, who are in the village, are watching as several people gather to see a sign that contains an announcement that whoever catches the kidnapper in the village will receive a reward. This then made her feel sure that Hyakkimaru would be able to catch the kidnapper while explaining his strength to the villagers. In the evening, Yuzero returned to his house and again gave food to Ohagi. He looks very kind to Ohagi. He is even willing to not eat all night just to make her recover, which makes her not have the heart to eat him because she feels that Yuzero is different from other humans. On the other hand, Dororo, who still hasn't found the kidnapper, decides to sleep first, but the next day she hears news about a kidnapping in the village, which makes the reward for catching the kidnapper even bigger. But Dororo is confused about how kidnappers can kidnap people, while last night she didn't hear any commotion. This made her think that the kidnapper might not be a monster but a human. On the other hand, Yuzero realizes that Ohagi's condition is worsening and intends to take her to the doctor. But because there was no doctor in the village, he decided to take Ohagi outside the village. While on their way, Dororo and Hyakkimaru met them. Then she explained that the woman was a spider monster and told Yuzero to stay away from her. Unexpectedly, he protected Ohagi and said he was the kidnapper, not Ohagi. Suddenly, Yuzero was attacked from behind because the villagers heard his words, so they decided to arrest him. However, Ohagi manages to kill the villagers and suck their blood to restore her strength, then takes Yuzero away. At the same time, Hyakkimaru chased them. When Yuzero and Ohagi wanted to run away from the village, he was suddenly hit by several arrows from the villagers. This made Ohagi very angry, so she turned into a spider monster and slaughtered the troops. Luckily, Hyakkimaru arrived just in time and slashed Ohagi's leg. This made her weaker, and finally, Ohagi and Yuzero died hugging each other. Even so, Dororo was impressed because she had just found out that there are monsters that can fall in love with humans. After that incident, they continued their journey to defeat the other monsters. The scene changed and showed a village suddenly rained down by ashes from a black cloud that only covered the village. After paying close attention, it turned out that the ash rain was a sign that the village would be in danger, and to prevent this, the village head ordered his residents to prepare a bride. At the same time, Hyakkimaru and Dororo, who were traveling, accidentally met a group of people carrying a bride. But suddenly a boy appeared from above who wanted to shoot the group of people, and it turned out that the boy was the younger brother of the bride who was said to be married off to a monster so that disaster would not befall their village. The boy then pointed to a cloud covering the village and told them about a monster named Negosure. The monster likes to eat humans, and it is not uncommon for it to appear suddenly in its village and eat the people there. The only way to stop Negosure is by sacrificing a bride to him, and if the villagers don't do that, then the entire village will be eaten by him. Hearing this, Dororo intends to help the boy, but she asks for something in return. Suddenly, he said he would return some caterpillars and a stone. At first, Dororo was quite disappointed with the reward, but after discovering that the stone was gold, she agreed. After that, the boy introduced himself as Saru. Soon after, Hyakkimaru, Dororo, and Saru started their action and managed to save Sarah's elder sister. But when he wanted to take his elder sister away, she refused and said that this was her own free will because she didn't want anyone else to fall prey to the monster. However, Dororo insists they don't have to worry about the monster because Hyakkimaru will beat it. Not long after, a bunch of clouds appeared and covered them all. The clouds sucked in the guards and vomited them out again in a miserable state. Behind the cloud, it turns out that there is a very large centipede monster, so Dororo orders Hyakkimaru to attack. Unfortunately, his vision was covered with fog, so Hyakkimaru couldn't see the centipede monster. Meanwhile, the centipede monster intended to attack Saru, so his elder sister saved him and was instead eaten by the centipede monster. Not only that, but the centipede monster was also about to pounce on Hyakkimaru, but suddenly a gas gushed from the ground and made the monster fly away. The centipede monster was apparently afraid of the sunlight caused by the bursts of gas which caused the black clouds that covered the monster to disappear. On the other hand, Saru looks very sad after he loses his elder sister. Then he brought Dororo and Hyakkimaru to where he lived and told them that he lived alone because his parents had died when he was young. Since then, Saru has had to survive alone in the forest because the humans chased him away. Even he was often hurt by the villagers until he finally met a woman who accepted him and treated him well. That woman was the previous bride, whom he had considered his elder sister, even though the woman was not his biological sister. Hearing this, Dororo decided to help Saru get his revenge by defeating the centipede monster. But Hyakkimaru couldn't do anything because he couldn't see anything, and now he was just throwing stones. Not long after, the cloud suddenly appeared again, but it was much bigger this time. Shortly after, Saru and Dororo devise a plan to defeat the centipede monster without Hyakkimaru's help. The next day, they started their action by leading the centipede monster to a flammable place. When the centipede monster was in the place they had prepared, Saru launched a fire arrow attack which instantly set the centipede monster on fire and hoped that the sunlight would succeed in defeating the monster. But it turns out that the centipede monster can increase its mist, so he gets back up and intends to attack Saru and Dororo. Luckily, Hyakkimaru came and threw a rock at the centipede monster, and when the monster approached him, he managed to slash it. That turned out to be his idea, where he purposely used the sound of rock to determine the direction of the centipede monster. But it turned out that the centipede monster was still not dead, so Dororo jumped on the body and told Hyakkimaru to listen to her voice. Initially, Dororo fainted from being hit by a stone, which made it difficult for Hyakkimaru to attack the centipede monster. But then, she finally came to her senses and told Hyakkimaru to hear her voice again. In the end, they managed to defeat the centipede monster, which made Hyakkimaru's nose come back. Meanwhile, Saru was very happy because his elder sister was still alive. And before Hyakkimaru and Dororo left, Saru's elder sister gave them a flower as a token of thanks, and after that, they parted ways. After a while of traveling, Dororo suddenly fainted with a fever. Seeing this, Hyakkimaru tried to find help. But unfortunately, no one could help her until finally, Hyakkimaru met a nun who wanted to take care of Dororo at her house. While being treated, Dororo often became delirious by mentioning her parents' names. The scene changes, showing her past when her parents were still alive. So, Dororo is the daughter of the head of the village, who decides to become the leader of the bandits because their village has been burned down by the samurai. At that time, the samurai was a very cruel military and political group and often attacked people. Her father is named Bigoro, and her mother is named Uchida. They have a friend named Itachi and several other subordinates. At that time, Dororo was classified as a very talkative little girl. She even liked to force her parents to take her to war, but Uchida always forbade it because she was worried since Dororo was still very small. One day, suddenly, the samurai army appeared to attack the bandits. Luckily, Bigoro and his troops won the battle this time. After the battle, they continued their journey again to find other groups of samurai and plunder their treasures. But in the middle of the road, there was a debate between Bigoro and Itachi because Itachi had been very impudent towards Uchida and even suggested Bigoro and his comrades join the ruling samurai. This made him angry and disappointed in Itachi because Bigoro did not want to join the samurai rulers after what they did to their village. The next day, they tried to loot the samurai group, which, according to Itachi, was resting. But after Bigoro issued an order to attack, the samurai were already prepared and instead attacked them all. Many of the bandit group's troops were injured, and it turned out that all of this was Itachi's plan, which had betrayed Bigoro at that time. Luckily, he was not killed by Itachi. After that, he let Dororo and her parent go instead. After that incident, Dororo and her parents didn't know what to do anymore. One day, Bigoro was killed when the samurai attacked him, so Dororo was left alone with his mother. Sadly, they had no destination or food, but they had to keep walking until finally, a man told them about a place where rich people usually distribute food to poor people. Hearing this, Uchida took Dororo to that place. But they instead met with Itachi, who at that time had a high position after joining the group of samurai who controlled the place. Soon after, an angry Dororo attacked him with a rock, but Itachi just let it be. But then, the chef suddenly said that the food distribution was almost finished, so everyone pushed each other to get food rations. Luckily, Uchida managed to get some leftover food, but because she didn't bring a container, she finally volunteered her hand to serve as a food container even though it was very hot. Even she was willing not to eat the food for Dororo's sake, and when they continued on their way again, this time Uchida fell and eventually died. Since that day, Dororo vowed not to give up in the face of war. In the present, she has recovered and continues their journey. The scene changes, showing a male fisherman who is trying to save himself because his boat is sinking. But suddenly, the lake water, which had been calm, surged, causing the fisherman to drift away, and it turned out to be caused by a giant crab monster that ate the fisherman. Elsewhere, Daigo seems worried about the drought that hit his village. Then he went to the Hall of Hell Temple to check the condition of the demon statues there, and it turned out that many of them had been destroyed. Shortly after that, Daigo finally found out that the cause of the destruction of the demon statues was Hikamaru because his shadow appeared, displayed by the demon statue. Meanwhile, Tahamaru, who is starting to get suspicious of the secrets his parents are hiding, orders Higo and Mu to do something. At night, Higo and Mu kidnapped one of Daigo's male servants, and Tahamaru asked why his father was looking for a baby boy who had disappeared 16 years ago. But it seemed the messenger didn't want to tell them. He even bit his tongue until it bled. In the end, Tahamaru went to meet his father and asked him the same question directly. But Daigo didn't want to tell him and told him not to interfere. That annoyed Tahamaru, so he decided to go to a hill to calm down. Not long after, Higo and Mu came, and Tahamaru told them that he had never seen his father that serious since he was little. This made him think that the existence of a baby boy must be very important to his father. Not far from where he was, Tahamaru saw a village, and he came to it with his men. When they got there, he was asked for help by the residents to eradicate the demon in the lake, and the demon was a crab monster that had previously eaten a fisherman. The villagers explained that the crab monster had claimed many victims, and as a candidate for village leader, Tahamaru accepted the request. Shortly after, Tahamaru and his men rushed to plan, and when they set sail, suddenly, their boat stopped, and a crab monster appeared. The crab then sucked their boat, but luckily, Tahamaru had ordered his men to use the ropes tied to the trees to hold their boat. When the monster caught one of his men, Tahamaru boldly stepped forward, attacked the crab monster, and managed to injure it. Unfortunately, the crab monsters could still survive and attack them from below, so it made a hole in their boat, and Tahamaru ordered his troops to retreat. Tahamaru knew that his boats were no longer usable and found it difficult to kill the crab monsters in the water. Then the villagers unite and devise a plan to build a dam there. The villagers united to do Tahamaru's orders, and when the lake was dry, he and his troops began to attack the crab monster. At first, Tahamaru managed to push the crab monster away, but the crab monster managed to destroy the dam, so the water returned to the lake, and the crab monster managed to push them. Even Higo was almost eaten by the crab monster. Luckily, Hikamaru arrived on time and defeated the crab monster with just one slash. After successfully defeating the crab monster, Tahamaru thanked him and gave him some money. But Tahamaru feels strange with Hikamaru when Dororo mentions that Hikamaru is blind. Higo and Mu were even surprised to hear that and were amazed by Hikamaru, who was blind but actually managed to defeat the monster. Dororo then asked Tahamaru about the location of a very rich and prosperous village, and after Tahamaru showed her the place, she said goodbye. When Hikamaru and Dororo arrived at the village, suddenly, a woman was surprised to see Hikamaru's arrival because she seemed to have a past with him. The woman looked scared when she saw him and said that the demon's child had come. After that, Dororo and Hikamaru go to a theater performance about Daigo, who can prosper his village. Unexpectedly, they met Biwamaru again, and they started talking. Biwamaru then feels surprised by the area that Daigo leads because that area used to be a barren land, but now it can be prosperous. When he was about to leave, Biwamaru realized that Hyakimara had killed a human because he saw the color of Hyakimara's soul, which had a little red spot. Meanwhile, Higo and Mu report to Daigo about Hyakimaro, the blind boy who doesn't have hands, and it makes him surprised to hear that. The scene returns to Dororo and Hyakimaro walking through the village, where they overhear the two people talking about Bamon. So, Bamon is a fortress used by Daigo's army to protect his village from attacks by the Asakura clan. The Asakura is an enemy clan that often wages war with Daigo, and due to the large number of corpses being killed at Bamon, the monsters gather every night to eat the corpses. When Hyakimaro and Dororo arrived at Bamon, he felt a very dense demonic aura, but suddenly a boy appeared who approached the two of them and warned them both to be careful and not to cross the wall. The boy named Tsukuruko then told Hyakimaro and Dororo that behind the wall was his village. But when the Asakura clan came, they burned his village, which made the residents finally leave the village. It turns out that Tsukuruko intends to take back his village and meet his family, making Dororo want to help him. Meanwhile, Daigo already knows Hyakimara's whereabouts and wants to kill him. However, Noe didn't stay silent and tried to stop him, but he refused and reasoned that what he was doing was for the sake of his village and his power. Daigo kept walking away regardless of his wife's words, but it turned out that Tahamara had heard her parents' argument. Tahamara then decided to walk into the village, where he met a mad woman who said that Hyakimaro was the child of a demon. Because he was curious about this, he started asking the crazy woman, and it turned out that the crazy woman was one of the midwives who took part in Hyakimara's birth process. The mad woman told everything about Daigo, who sacrificed his son's body to the demon for his village. Elsewhere, Hyakimaro, who is trying to help Tsukuruko find his family, is suddenly surprised by the large number of evil spirits that inhabit Bamon in the form of wolves. Even so, Hyakimaro managed to survive, even being able to defeat some of the evil spirits. But in the middle of the fight, Tsukuruko went alone to find his family, which made Dororo worry, so she followed him. Unfortunately, Tsukuruko and Dororo were caught by the Asakura clan troops. At the same time, Hyakimaro, who was still fighting, was suddenly surprised by an arrow attack that turned out to be from Daigo's army. At first, Hyakimaro tries to attack Daigo, but Daigo suddenly insults him and calls him a child of the demon, then asks him why he is still alive. Hyakimaro, who heard this, became silent, so he was attacked again, but luckily, he managed to get away. However, after that incident, he always thought about Daigo's words. Meanwhile, Dororo, who was being locked up, tried to escape through the hole above her. Even though she was caught, she managed to escape in the end. On the other hand, Tahamaru, who was still searching for the baby, finally met his mother and asked about his father, who had sacrificed his elder brother for his village. Noe replied that it was true, saying she would not forget that incident. Hearing this, Tahamara felt disappointed and said that his parents had no mercy, but Daigo suddenly appeared and emphasized that they did all that for their village. He explained that as a leader, he was willing to sacrifice his son for the prosperity of his people. If he didn't sacrifice his son, their village would have been destroyed by now because it had experienced a terrible drought and disease outbreak. Not long after, Hyakimara suddenly came to Daigo's residence, but his presence was greeted with harsh words by Daigo. But Noe is different because she calls Hyakimara son, even though she has never seen him since he was a baby. Unfortunately, Hyakimara had to leave because he was attacked by arrows. Seeing that, Tahamaro was angry with Daigo for wanting to kill his elder brother. But Daigo got angry again and asked if he wanted his people to experience the same thing as before, which was always hit by drought and disease outbreaks. Hearing that, Tahamaro fell silent again. Daigo then told Tahamaro to go to the Hall of Hell Temple and cancel his promise to the demon if he wanted to stop Daigo's intentions. Meanwhile, in the forest, Hyakimara seems still thinking about his parent. Suddenly Dororo tells Hyakimara to save Tsukuruko because he and the other prisoners will be killed by the Asakura clan. On the other hand, several of Daigo's warriors have gathered somewhere and are preparing to fight. Meanwhile, Tahamara feels a dilemma between killing his elder brother or fighting his father. In the end, he decided to go to the Hall of Hell to go against his father's orders, but when he arrived, he was chased away by the demons. On the other hand, when Tsukuruko was about to be killed by the Asakura clan troops, suddenly Daigo's group came, and a battle ensued between them. Not long after, the demon spirit that inhabits Banmon appears and helps Daigo's group defeat the Asakura clan. Suddenly, Hyakimara comes, so he meets his father again. Unexpectedly, Hyakkimaru saw the soldier who killed Mione earlier, so his emotions became uncontrollable. When Dororo was about to calm Hyakkimaru, Tahamaru suddenly came and said he was Hyakkimaru's younger brother. Initially, Dororo was happy because Hyakkimaru had met his family. But Tahamaru preferred to follow Daigo's ambition to prosper the village, so he intended to kill Hyakkimaru, and the fight between the brothers ensued. When Dororo wants to free Sakuruko, the demon Banmon appears again and intends to devour Sakuruko, so she screams for Hyakkimaru. Hearing this, Hyakkimaru rushed to help Dororo and injured Tahamaru's eye due to a sword slash from him. When the battle was almost over, Nue suddenly came and apologized to Hyakkimaru for doing evil things to him, and to atone for all her sins. She even dared to stab herself, so she could feel Hyakkimaru's suffering. At the same time, the statue Nue was holding became as bright as Banmon's fortress behind her, and soon it was destroyed, forcing Daigo's troops to retreat. After that, Dororo tries to get Sakuruko to come because she thinks he doesn't have a family anymore. But it turns out that his family appears behind the fort, so even Sakuruko can't accept that invitation. In the end, Hyakkimaru and Dororo return to continue their journey together. After Hyakkimaru meets his parents, his attitude changes, and he often ignores Dororo because he has the ambition to return his body to avenge his father's actions. Then she told him to go to a hot spring, so he could calm his mind. But he refused, so in the end, Dororo was forced to lie by saying there was a demon in the hot spring. The scene then changes and shows Nue, who was previously desperate to stab herself, and now her condition is worsening. While Daigo is worried that if all the demon statues in the Hall of Hell Temple have been destroyed, his village will return to how it used to be one day. Elsewhere, a woman drags a man into a cave behind a waterfall. The woman then put the man on a rock and hurt his face. The woman apparently intended to find the right face for the stone statue in the waterfall. The scene again shows Dororo and Hyakkimaru, who is currently resting in a house. When looking for firewood in the forest, Dororo accidentally went too far, so she found the previous stone statue. Not long after, the woman appeared, and her face reminded Dororo of her mother's face because they were similar. However, Dororo was worried that the woman was a demon, so she brought the woman to meet Hyakkimaru so that he could confirm it. But apparently, Hyakkimaru doesn't know whether the woman is a demon or a human because, in his vision, he only sees white with a few black spots on the woman. Finally, the woman introduced herself as Ukaka, and it turned out that Dororo and Hyakkimaru were staying in her house. At night, Dororo, who was curious, asked Ukaka about the faceless statues she had previously seen in the forest. Ukaka was initially surprised to hear that question, but she told her that there used to be a female Buddhist sculptor who came to the place and found an eroded rock that looked like Fudo, a god who was wise but had a frightening appearance. At first, the sculptor was famous for her sculptures in the form of a friendly Buddha's face, but because of the war that was raging on, people wanted her to make a statue with a frightening face. However, she refused to make a statue with a scary face, so people began to forget about her. Even so, she was determined to be recognized by people again. She intended to make a Fudo-shaped statue on a large rock. At first, everything went smoothly when she made the hands, body, and legs. But when she wanted to sculpt the face, she couldn't make it because she wanted to make a face that was not recognized by people before. Every time she made a face she had seen before. As time went on, she continued to sculpt the statue but couldn't, so she grew old and died regretfully. When dinner was over, Dororo, who felt Ukaka was like her mother, asked her if she would be willing to be called mother by Dororo. Hearing that, Ukaka accepted it, and Dororo finally hugged her. When Dororo was about to fall asleep on Ukaka's lap, she continued her story that after the sculptor died, the statue became a den of the demon. The demon wanted to complete the sculptor's task, so he revived the sculptor and told her to bring him a human to patch their faces. Unexpectedly, the sculptor is Ukaka herself, and she has the power to change her face and voice to resemble the person her victim knows. Even though Ukaka wasn't interested in Dororo's young face, it turned out that all this time, she was interested in Hyakkimaru's face, and she had poisoned them through the food she served. Ukaka then took Hyakkimaru to the waterfall to be sacrificed. Luckily Dororo realized that, so she rushed after them. Arriving there, she tried to fight Ukaka but couldn't. Not long after, Hyakkimaru woke up and tried to attack Ukaka. He realized that the statue was the real demon. Then he tried to destroy the statue, but instead, he fell into the water when hit by an attack from the statue. When Hyakkimaru was in the water, he saw many people who had been sacrificed by Akaka. Then she disguised herself as Hyakimara's mother to trick him when he returned to the top of the waterfall. Unfortunately, Akaka failed because Hyakimara never saw his mother's face, but she managed to catch him and intended to make her face grow. At the same time, Dororo restrained Akaka, advised her not to use her ego, and said that she didn't need a perfect face as long as she had a nose, mouth, and eyes. Hearing Dororo's words made Akaka silent, but suddenly the statue hurt Akaka so that she finally died by disappearing into dust. However, Hyakimaro attacks the statue's face, causing the demon inside to disappear. After that incident, Dororo and Hyakimaro continued their journey to the hot springs, but they both met Bawamaru and several boys again. This irritated Dororo, but the boys accidentally saw her back, showing an image that looked like a map. It was finally discovered that the image would only be visible if Dororo was exposed to hot water. The scene again shows Dororo's past. At that time, her father had a prediction that he would die, so he wanted to tell his wife about a map containing the treasures they had looted from the samurai. But her mother refused to see it because she was afraid she would leak it, so she suggested drawing half the map on her back and half on Dororo's back. She did this so she could not see it. Turning to the present, Dororo doesn't seem to care about the treasure because her goal now is to help Hyakimari get his body. However, Bawamaru says that the map on her body is important. He even told her that the map could move people and change the world. Hearing that made Dororo confused. When Dororo and Hyakimaro continued their journey, they suddenly heard a woman's voice telling them to take care of someone. Not long after, a female spirit appeared who told them to take care of her baby, and it disappeared. However, Hyakimaro didn't react because he felt the woman's spirit was not a demon. As Dororo and Hyakimaro continued their journey, they found a ruined temple. When they explored the place, suddenly, the spirit of the woman who had appeared earlier told Hyakimaro that there was something underneath. When he checked it, it turned out there was liquid there, and it seemed that it was kerosene. That made Dororo think the place was destroyed because it had been burned. At the same time, the baby that the female spirit was referring to appeared, but someone came, and the baby suddenly disappeared. The person who came was a man named Sabame, the village leader. But it seems that this person looks very suspicious. Even Hyakimaro saw a red spot on Sabame's soul aura. But he doesn't know whether he is a demon or not. After that, they were invited by Sabame to his house to have dinner and spend the night there. While eating, Dororo asked Sabame why the temple they had visited before was on fire, but everyone suddenly fell silent when she asked that question. Then Sabame said there used to be a nun who took in orphan children at the temple, but instead of being treated well, the nun treated the children badly. The orphans were worked very hard and often tortured. Even worse, the orphans would be sold if the nun had no money. Sadly, the temple was struck by lightning. It caught fire and scorched the nun and the orphans. After hearing Sabame's explanation, Hyakimaro and Dororo realized that the female spirit they met earlier was the figure of the nun. But after hearing the story, Dororo felt confused about why the temple was scorched by lightning while they had found traces of an oil spill there. When they were sleeping, a giant caterpillar suddenly appeared in their room, and when it was about to attack, Hyakimaro woke up and slashed it. Hyakimaro even managed to stab the giant caterpillar. However, suddenly, the giant moth appeared to take the giant caterpillar with him. The next day, when Dororo was walking in the village, it was seen that all the residents there were very kind and friendly to her. Even she was offered by a grandmother to eat dango cakes with her and her granddaughter. But when Dororo asked the grandmother about the burning temple, suddenly, the grandmother behaves strangely and leaves her. Even the people who had been friendly gave her a sinister look. On the other hand, Hyakimaro, who is suspicious of Sabame, decides to follow him. Unfortunately, he was caught by Sabame when he was on the hill. Meanwhile, Dororo, who accidentally found a temple in the forest, tries to enter the temple, and it turns out that the temple is a rice storage place for the villagers. Then she accidentally found the basement in the temple, but when she tried to enter the room, suddenly some people pushed her and locked her. Meanwhile, Sabame again tells Hyakimaro about his village. In ancient times, his village looked like hell because many inhabitants were hungry, their property was robbed, and their crops were not taken care of due to the many wild animals that ate them. But one day, Sabame meets Ayakashi, a demon willing to help him prosper in his village, but on the condition that he has to give up the human soul as a sacrifice. Without thinking twice, Sabame agreed to Ayakashi's conditions to save his village. Since that day, the life of the residents in his village has become prosperous. Meanwhile, Dororo, trapped in the basement, was suddenly startled by a group of caterpillars that attacked her. Luckily, when she was cornered, the spirit of the previous giant baby came to help her, and it turned out that the baby was the spirit of the orphans killed in the previous temple. Then the spirits showed Dororo that it was not the lightning that killed them, but Sabame and the other villagers who wanted to sacrifice for Ayakashi. The spirits then helped Dororo get out of that place. While Hyakkimaru was about to kill Sabame, he was intercepted by several moths that attacked him. Even though he was initially overwhelmed and under pressure, Hyakkimaru finally managed to defeat the moths. As a result of Hyakkimaru's attack earlier, one of the moths became shaky, causing the entire village to burn down, including their rice storage area, which left Sabame speechless. Dororo then meets Hyakkimaru to tell him everything. After that, she orders him to go to the lake because that's where the demon hides. When he goes there, the moth demon appears, so Hyakkimaru attacks him. Hyakkimaru even managed to beat him without difficulty, and after the moth demon was defeated, Hyakkimaru suddenly felt pain because his backbones had now returned. At the same time, one of the demon statues in the Hall of Hell Temple was destroyed. After seeing the burning houses of the villagers, Dororo initially feels sorry for them. However, Hyakkimaru is different, and even he doesn't care about that because all he cares about is killing all of the demons to be able to return his body for revenge. This made her very disappointed with him, and she felt that Hyakkimaru was nothing more than the demon himself, so Dororo finally decided to part ways with him. While in the middle of the trip, Itachi and his troops suddenly came, and it turned out that their goal in approaching Dororo was to find half a treasure map stored in her body. But she admitted that she didn't save the map. She even showed her bare back because the map would only appear if her back was exposed to hot water. Even so, Itachi didn't believe her, so he still took her with him. In the middle of the forest, Itachi explained to Dororo that he had known the map for a long time. He had even dismantled her mother's grave. Dororo was angry to hear that and wanted to beat him, but unfortunately, she couldn't do it. The next day, Dororo was brought again by Itachi to where the treasure was. Then he told her to look for the treasure there because he thought that only Dororo knew the treasure's location. They then looked for a boat to cross there, but all they found was a village that looked like it had been robbed and boats that had been damaged. Not long after, a man came and offered a boat for them. Initially, Dororo tried to warn Itachi not to accept him because she found the man very suspicious. But he didn't listen to her and took it for granted. When they crossed, they were surprised that two sharks were pulling their boat. The man explained that the sharks were his family. Even that man was willing to give his own hand to be eaten by his sharks. The man said that since he gave his hands, the two sharks didn't want to eat anything else, and all they wanted was human flesh, so the man killed all the villagers to feed his two sharks. This surprised them, and it turned out that the man's purpose in taking them was only to serve as food for the sharks. The man ordered the two sharks to eat them, and half of Itachi's troops had to die. After that, the man left, leaving one of his sharks to look after Itachi, Dororo, and their remaining troops. At that time, Itachi felt very hopeless, but Dororo kept trying to strengthen him to keep his spirits up. She said that if only they complained, they were weaker than him because she was used to living alone from a young age but never complained. Even when she almost died, she never complained. After that, Dororo plunged into the water to use her body as bait, while Itachi's troops tried to kill the shark when she came up later, and finally, they killed the shark. Not long after, the man came back, and he was shocked because one of the sharks had died. Soon after, the man was attacked by Itachi and his troops until they were black and blue. After that, Itachi forced Dororo to hand over her map again. He even took off all of her clothes, and he just realized that all this time, Dororo was a girl. Not long after, the map on Dororo's back was seen, so Itachi drew the map and left her. On the other hand, the man is still not dead and wants to avenge the shark that died. The scene changes and shows Jukai doing his job. Soon after, an old man told Jukai to stop doing that useless job. Suddenly, a demon appeared, but strangely it didn't attack Jukai but instead attacked the old man. Unexpectedly, Hyakkimaru came and killed the demon, which made Jukai both surprised and happy because he finally met Hyakkimaru after all this time. Then he took Hyakkimaru to his place in a cave, where he was very surprised when he heard that Hyakkimaru could speak and could hear his voice. Hyakkimaru even told Jukai about the person who had sacrificed his body, Daigo Kagemitsu, who was a leader of Kaga village and his father. Jukai was very surprised and felt that his actions in raising and releasing Hyakkimaru to the outside world made Hyakkimaru suffer. When Hyakkimaru asked Jukai for prosthetic legs, he actually destroyed the prosthetic legs so that Hyakkimaru would not fight anymore. Even he knows that Hyakkimaru killed not only demons but several humans. In the middle of their conversation, the ground above them suddenly gave way, closing the hole in the cave. The scene changes and shows Tahomaru, whose attitude has changed after he was defeated by Hyakkimaru in the previous battle. Tahomaru, who used to be known as a strict and kind person, is now only angry. Even when his mother's condition had improved, Tahomaru didn't want to visit her and preferred to go to check reports that there was a demon in one of the villagers' houses. It didn't take long for him to arrive there. When Tahomaru and his men entered the house, they saw a rat demon, so they killed him and burned the house. Meanwhile, Hyakkimaru continues to dig to get out of the cave while Jukai continues to advise him and ask about his reasons for killing the demons. Hyakkimaru replied that he only wanted to have his body. Moments later, Hyakkimaru finally makes his way out, but they are confronted by a group of demons from before. The demon came from a tree in front of the cave, so he finished them off and destroyed the tree's heart. After that, Jukai let Hyakkimaru go because he remembered Hyakkimaru's words that someone had disappeared with him, so Hyakkimaru had to look for him. Jukai feels that the person who has been with Hyakkimaru is more suitable to protect and advise him, and that person is none other than Dororo. In the end, he starts his journey to find Dororo. On the other hand, after finishing killing the rat demon, Tahomaru orders his father to kill Hyakkimaru, who is currently reported to be on an island. While on the island, a man who is friends with sharks is seen who is currently angry because one of his pet sharks, Saburamaru, has been killed by Itachi and his troops. Then the man ordered his surviving shark, Jiramaru, to avenge Saburamaru's death. Hearing orders from his master, Jiramaru's eyes changed, and he went up to the mainland to eat Itachi's soldier. Then he turned into a demon and was about to attack Dororo. Luckily, Hyakkimaru arrived on time, and he killed the demon. After successfully defeating the demon, Hyakkimaru apologized to Dororo for leaving her, and said he had come to pick her up. But suddenly, Hyakkimaru felt pain, and it turned out that one of his legs had returned. Unfortunately, the man who owned the shark was still not dead, but Hyakkimaru and Dororo chose not to care about the man and finally left to find Itachi. Meanwhile, Itachi, who had found the treasure, was surprised by several traps that killed several of his men. But not far from there, Hyakkimaru and Dororo were surprised by the arrival of several ships heading to the island. It turns out the ships are Tahomaru's group that intends to find Hyakkimaru. Arriving on the island, Tahomaru ordered his men to kill anyone who was there. Hearing this, Dororo rushed to hide, while several of Itachi's entourage had to be killed because their whereabouts were discovered by Tahomaru's troops. Unexpectedly, Dororo met Itachi while hiding, and they worked together to divert Tahomaru's troops so they would not get closer to their treasure because they were worried that if his troops found out, the treasure would be confiscated. After the plan was successfully carried out, they secretly intended to leave, but on the way, they were discovered by Tahomaru's troops. In the end, the fight between Hyakkimaru versus Tahomaru took place again, while Dororo was taken away by Itachi so she could be safe. At first, Hyakkimaru could dominate the fight, but Higo and Mu came to Tahomaru's aid and succeeded in pushing him. Even Hyakkimaru's sword was broken by Tahomaru, and he was almost defeated by Tahomaru. On the other hand, even though Itachi wanted to take Dororo's treasure, he was still kind to her, and he didn't even intend to kill her because Itachi still respected her father as his ex-leader. Unfortunately, while on the run, Itachi didn't want to lose his treasure and intended to come back to look for it. Then, Dororo tried to warn him, but he remained so stubborn that he had to be injured by several arrows stuck in his body. Seeing that, Dororo panicked and accidentally dropped the statues there, so she took the initiative to drop all of the statues. When Dororo wanted to save Itachi, the man who owned the shark appeared on top of the hill carrying a torch and blew up the place. This forced Tahomaru, who was fighting Hyakkimaru, to retreat, while Dororo accidentally managed to find her father's possessions due to the previous explosion. At the same time, Itachi finally died because he protected Dororo from the previous explosion. On the other hand, Hyakkimaru, who survived, rushed to find Dororo and found her in the cave where her father's treasure was kept. Dororo remembered Biwamaru's words before saying her treasure would move people and change the world. But because she didn't know what those words meant, she didn't know what to do either, so she just took some of her treasures for the next trip. After some time traveling, Hyakkimaru and Dororo arrive at a village and ask a man about a sword maker named Monesuna because, at this time, Hyakkimaru's sword was broken due to his fight with Tahamaru. But strangely, the man said Monesuna was a bad sword maker, and his daughter had an ugly face. But when Dororo approached the sword maker's house, it turned out that what the previous man said was very different from what they saw. The daughter of the sword maker is very beautiful, and her name is Okawa. But here, Hyakkimaru shows his strange habit to her and makes her uncomfortable. Okawa informed her father about Dororo and Hyakkimaru's arrival. Then they were invited by Monesuna to a temple to purify Hyakkimaru's sword and to pray. Unexpectedly, while praying, a demon suddenly appears and instills magic on Hyakkimaru. After being hit by the demon's magic, Hyakkimaru's attitude changes. Even his words were the opposite of what he said. Hyakkimaru told Dororo he didn't want to be with her anymore and stopped looking for his body. Even he accepted Okawa to come with him, making Dororo very annoyed. But it wasn't just Hyakkimaru whose words turned around. Dororo experienced the same thing because even though she was annoyed, she agreed to everything Hyakkimaru and Okawa said. Then she left them. The next day, unexpectedly, Okawa intends to marry Hyakkimaru. She even invites several people to attend their wedding. Knowing this, Dororo was very surprised and angry, but again she gave her blessing to both of them, making Okawa very happy. Dororo, who didn't know what had happened, left them. After that, she went to visit Monesuna to talk to him. There, Dororo tells Hyakkimaru about her frustration, but she notices something strange around her. When she spoke at Monetsuna's place, far from the shrine, Dororo was fine. But when she was at the Okawa house, which was very close to the shrine, what she said was exactly the opposite of what she wanted to say. Then Dororo went to the temple to check whether there was a demon. And it turns out that her guess was right. She saw a demon relaxing on top of the temple. After that, she threw a rock and made the demon fall. Not long after, Hyakkimaru and Okawa came, then he intended to eradicate the demon. Unfortunately, Hyakkimaru was hit by the demon's magic, so it turned to attack Dororo. Luckily the demon was beaten by Monesuna and made a return to its place. But Okawa realized that what had happened to her was actually the work of a demon, so she decided to cancel her wedding. When she was about to cancel her wedding with Hyakkimaru, Okawa was even proposed to by one of the young men there, and she accepted him, so the wedding took place. Meanwhile, Hyakkimaru, who has his new sword, returns to continue his journey. Long story short, Dororo looked very happy because they passed several trees experiencing autumn because all the trees and leaves were bright red. While eating some fruit, she told Hyakkimaru about the seasons in this world: summer, autumn, spring, and winter. But for her, autumn is the most beautiful season, and she hopes that Hyakkimaru can see all of those seasons one day. Not long after, a man named Sabota appeared in front of them and said he was a demon hunter just like Hyakkimaru. But the difference was that he was hunting demons not to get his body but to avenge the death of his mother, who had been killed by a demon. However, Dororo and Hyakkimaru noticed Sabota's suspicious movements. Then he took them to where the demon was, and after a while, the demon appeared. Dororo was surprised when she saw that the demon's body had a mixed body of several animals, but it looked more like a tiger, and Hyakkimaru attacked the tiger demon. But in the middle of the fight, Sabota attacked Hyakkimaru, and it turned out that it was indeed his plan so the tiger demon would kill Hyakkimaru and Dororo. Sabota said he could overcome the emptiness in his heart by seeing the people killed by the tiger demon. Soon after, the tiger demon returned to attack Hyakkimaru, causing him and Dororo to fall. The scene then changes and shows the story of Sabota in the past. He used to be a kind person and loved his mother very much. He was even willing to carry his mother every day to get to his destination. Unfortunately, one day, the tiger demon ate his mother, making Sabota very sad. But what's worse, after his mother was eaten by a tiger demon, the people in his village insulted him and called him a loser samurai. One day, several men in the village came to Sabota to ask him to avenge his mother, but the men instead died and were eaten by the tiger demon. And since then, Sabota has only been able to fill the void in his heart by watching the people the tiger demon eats. Turning to the present, Hyakkimaru and Dororo are finally rescued by Bawamaru, who suddenly appears at that place. After that, Hyakkimaru rushed to where the tiger demon was to defeat him. This time, he could slay the tiger demon, even though Sabota had joined forces with the demon. But unfortunately, after the tiger demon was defeated, not a single part of Hyakkimaru's body returned, which disappointed him. In the end, Hyakkimaru realized that several parts of his body were inside Daigo's body, so he intended to go to Daigo's place and take his body back. The scene changed, showing a village in Daigo's territory experiencing a disaster. Many villagers were affected by a strange disease, and their crops failed to harvest due to drought. On the other hand, Hyakkimaru, who was about to meet Daigo, ran into several spies from the Asakura clan troops and a man who was Daigo's subordinate. Elsewhere, Daigo has just received a report of a plague in one of the villages in his area. Unexpectedly, he ordered his men to burn the village so the plague would not spread throughout the area he led. Even Daigo ordered his men to kill people affected by the plague, and ordered people who were still healthy to join the war. Apart from that, they were ordered to take some horses to war. Not long after, Daigo's men, who previously met with Hyakkimaru, reported to him about Hyakkimaru, who was currently in his territory. Hearing this, Tahamara asked his father to assign him to kill Hyakkimaru. Tahamara feels sure with his friends, they can beat Hyakkimaru. Hearing that, Daigo agreed. But when he left, Daigo ordered several men to keep an eye on Tahamaru. Elsewhere, Dororo asks Hyakkimaru what he will do if he meets his parents. He replied that he would kill his parent if they prevented him. Hearing that made Dororo very surprised and sad. Meanwhile, Tahamaru, Higo, and Mu rush to leave, but Mu seems to have contracted a previous illness. However, he keeps it a secret from Tahamaru because he doesn't want Tahamaru to be disappointed. In the evening, when they were resting, Mu told Tahamaru about himself and Higo. In the past, Mu and Higo were victims of war, so they had to be locked up. After being cooped up for a while, Daigo made them as Tahamaru's training partners. Since then, they have been participating in various battles to protect him. The next day, we see several troops from Daigo who are currently heading to war, whereas in another place, when Hyakkimaru and Dororo are on their way, they are suddenly surprised by the appearance of Tahamaru, Higo, and Mu in front of them. Seeing this, Hyakkimaru became angry and fought against them. This time, he managed to excel despite being attacked by 3 people. He even hurt Mu and Higo's hands and pushed Tahamaru. Unfortunately, in the middle of the fight, Daigo's men attacked Hyakkimaru. They even threw a bomb tied to a horse at Hyakkimaru, causing him to fall into a ravine. They also captured Dororo as a hostage if Hyakkimaru survives and meets Daigo. At the bottom of the ravine, Hyakkimaru, who was injured, was suddenly visited by several demons who revived horses that had previously died. Hyakkimaru, who was already angry, finally used the demon horse to save Dororo. The scene then changes and shows Jukai waiting for the war to end so he can do his job. Not long after, he saw Dororo brought by some of Daigo's troops. Unfortunately, he doesn't know that Dororo is the one who is always with Hyakkimaru. On the other hand, Tahamaru, who was visiting Higo and Mu, finally discovered that Mu had contracted a disease. Then Tahamaru insisted on going into his room. However, Mu refused and told Tahamaru not to come near him. Mu said that with the injuries and illnesses he had suffered, he might no longer be able to participate in the fight with Tahamaru. Then he ordered Higo to protect Tahamaru while he was not by Tahamaru's side. Hearing this, Tahamaru felt very sad and told his men to kill Hyakkimaru. Meanwhile, Dororo, who is being held captive by Daigo's troops, is seen trying to escape from that place. But surprisingly, Noe arrives and frees her. Then Noe thanked her because she had accompanied Hyakkimaru all this time. But when Dororo wanted to leave, suddenly Noe came back and wanted to come with her. Noe did that, so she could meet Hyakkimaru because she regretted her actions, and if he did not forgive her, she would be willing to be killed by him. Soon after, the river flows suddenly became very swift, making the boat they were traveling on so difficult to control. Unfortunately, there is a wooden barrier in front of them, causing them to fall. Elsewhere, Mu had just left his room, so Higo and Tahamaru rush to look for him. Meanwhile, Dororo finally wakes up and realizes that she is in the previous village, which was burnt down by Daigo's men due to an epidemic. It turns out that she has been rescued by Bawamaru, who is in the village. After that, Dororo looked for Noe, who was caring for several villagers. Even though some looked happy with the help, some looked annoyed with Noe because her husband had burned their village and killed the residents who had contracted the disease. Meanwhile, at the village border, it can be seen that the demon horse that Hyakkimaru is riding on is starting to enter Daigo's territory. Then he attacks everyone who gets in his way. The scene again shows Dororo with Noe washing, where they hear the news that Daigo's troops are heading to the village and about a demon who suddenly attacks them. Hearing this, Noe and Dororo thought that the demon was Hyakkimaru's. It turned out their suspicions were true because Hyakkimaru and his demon horse were slaughtering Daigo's troops with surging anger. On the other hand, Mu apparently went to the Hall of Hell Temple and wanted to hand over his body to order the demons to protect the village in exchange for his soul. Not long after, Tahomaru and Higo came to warn Mu about the demon's contract. But after Mu made the agreement, nothing happened, and it turned out that the agreement could only be fulfilled with Hyakkimaru's body. Unexpectedly, lightning suddenly struck that place, and something strange happened to them. Meanwhile, after Hyakkimaru has finished slaughtering Daigo's troops, he intends to look for Dororo. However, he is surprised by the presence of Tahomaru and his troops, who now have body parts that have returned. Even Tahomaru now has 3 eyes, and it turns out that all of them are parts of Hyakkimaru's body. So, they were ordered by a demon in the Hall of Hell to kill him so that their agreement could be carried out. Meanwhile, Hyakkimaru, who knew this, felt very angry and intended to take his body back, so the battle between him and Tahomaru took place again. Fortunately, Hyakkimaru could beat Tahomaru again and kept shouting, asking Tahomaru to return his body. Not long after, Hyakkimaru's demon horse managed to kill Mu and Higo, thus making his hands return. But Tahomaru, who knew that his 2 men were dead, felt sad, so he wanted to kill Hyakkimaru. But in the middle of the fight, Hyakkimaru chose to run away because he didn't want the fight to be seen by his mother and Dororo, who arrived there. Then, the fight between them continued on the riverbank, where Hyakkimaru was thrown away. But fortunately, he corners Tahomaru again, so Tahomaru decides to run away to the palace. On the other hand, after Hyakkimaru battle earlier, Dororo and some of the residents there finally realized that they didn't have to depend on the samurai anymore, because if they depended on the samurai, then their lives would be swayed by the samurai themselves. Then they decided to rise up with their strength to survive without depending on anyone or relying on others. The scene returns to Tahomaru, who just arrived at the palace, where he orders everyone to leave, so he can fight freely. Meanwhile, Daigo is busy with his battle against the Asakura clan troops, so he cannot send reinforcements for Tahomaru. After waiting for a while, Hyakkimaru and Tahomaru were finally able to fight freely again. While Dororo, Noe, Biwamaru, and Jukai continued to go to the palace to stop their fight. The battle between them was fierce, even to the point of setting the palace on fire. But as time went on, Hyakkimaru could finally control his emotions, so he decided not to kill Tahomaru, and Tahomaru realized that he could not beat Hyakkimaru. But suddenly, the last demonic statue in the Hall of Hell reacted so that Tahomaru almost went out of control. Luckily, he managed to take out those 2 eyes, which suddenly appeared underground. Before it could appear, Hyakkimaru stabbed it and instantly brought his eyeballs back together while the object suddenly disappeared. After the fight ended, Noe and Jukai came to save him. But before that, Noe hugs Hyakkimaru, and Jukai gives a statue of the goddess of protection to him, similar to the statue that Noe had worshipped before. Now for the first time, Hyakkimaru can finally see and know his mother's face, and at that time, Dororo comes to help him to get out of the palace. At that time, Hyakkimaru was amazed by the world he saw for the first time. He praised Dororo's face, which he thought was beautiful. On the other hand, Noe, Jukai, and Tohamaru are still in the palace, even when it is destroyed. Everyone doesn't know if they are still alive or dead. Soon after, that news was known by Daigo, but he ignored it and continued to move to war. At the same time, the last demon statue in the Hall of Hell Temple was destroyed, causing Daigo to lose many of his troops and find it difficult to repel the Asakura clan troops that attacked them. Elsewhere, Dororo prepared some of her father's savings to form her power with the previous villagers. Meanwhile, Hyakkimaru, who still has business with Daigo, finally meets him at the Hall of Hell Temple, where he intends to kill him. But then, Hyakkimaru chose not to do that because he knew that he was not a demon, and after all, he had gotten what had been his all along. The anime ends by showing Hyakkimaru telling Daigo that he shouldn't become a demon because of his greed. After that, he continues his journey with Dororo. The moral that can be learned from this anime is that revenge will not give anything good, and greed will only bring destruction in the future.